Hello, my name is Georgina Rose. I'm a part-time esoteric content creator and part-time surfer of the aethers, and welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything relating to religion, mysticism, the occult, and everything on the fringe of esoterica, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a very important topic and one that causes a lot of confusion around mysticism, and that would be the New Age versus esotericism, because a lot of people do conflate the two, but the reality is that they're completely different. And a lot of people will just say, oh, they're different, but they won't get into why. Because to understand why, we need to talk about what esotericism is, what the New Age is, where these movements come from, and where they diverge, and give a path for spiritual seekers who might be confused. So why do people think these are the same thing? Well, I think a lot of people, particularly in the West, particularly in the Anglosphere, see everything outside of Christianity as kind of its own blob and cluster of beliefs, right? The term spiritual. The thing is, the term spiritual doesn't mean anything, right? Any religion can consider itself spiritual because every spiritual expression is fundamentally spiritual. And these distinctions matter because when you are a spiritual seeker and you are a new person who wants to understand mysticism and go closer to the divine, you need to have a path and some sort of direction. You need to know like what I want to do and what I can go down. Because a lot of people, they start this path by, questioning atheism or questioning Christianity or questioning whatever religion they were growing up around. And then they just kind of like fall into this vague category of things and they lack a direction. Because a lot of people, when they're first exposed to this stuff, are first exposed to New Age material, right? They go to the bookstore and they go to that mind, body, spirit section, and it's a bunch of books like about, the Enneagram, crystals, all that type of stuff. And the thing about those books is very often, and this is kind of how I feel a lot about the New Age movement, there'll be a kernel of truth in it, a kernel of metaphysical truth, but there'll be a lot brought around it that is fundamentally fluff. So how did this all begin? How do we get to the mind, body, spirit section of the bookstore? And how do we get to a place where we conflate real, perennially true mystical systems with this stuff? So the New Age, as we know it now, kind of began from a pre-existing system, as all religions and all spiritual movements do. There is nothing that just solely crops up out of nowhere, right? Because fundamentally we are all, and I'm a perennialist, this is how I view it, people having the same fundamental experience. There's a same inner truth that has existed since antiquity that we are all tapping into when we have spiritual experiences. And then we extrapolate it through the human mind because the human mind is fundamentally lesser than divinity, so we are limited in how much we can perceive. So we have these experiences and we extrapolate it out. So that's why you see these overlapping things, and that is why not everything in these New Age books is inherently false or bad, but a lot of it is. A lot of it is. So basically the New Age movement comes from, I would say, modern minds became super aware of it in the 1970s. There was a big spiritual revival in the 1970s. And a lot of this was from what I would call New Thought, which is the precursor to the New Age movement. New Thought was a system of belief and philosophy that really came out of the minds of a number of people. I would say the most important to look at would be Alice Bailey, who was a student of theosophy. So let's go back a little further. Theosophy. I have numerous times said theosophy is the precursor of the New Age movement, and that is kind of true, but kind of not, because there were things that happened after theosophy that got us to where we are now, right? If you were to read a book on theosophy, like say The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky, and then, go to a spiritual circle, right? You're going to notice a lot of big differences because fundamentally it has evolved since then and it is continuing to evolve. A number of ideas that you see in New Age spaces are completely new, like new. Like some of it has come from the 90s, some of the 2000s, and some from even more recent periods of time. So there is a gap here. And theosophy itself, I would not say is New Age. It is the precursor to the New Age, but it is kind of its own thing. So what is theosophy? Theosophy was a movement started by, as I said, Helena Blavatsky, a Slavic woman who had a mission. She believed by this axiom, the highest form of religion is truth. And so her belief was that through looking through all these religions, we can find that kernel of truth in them, right? And so what she did is she traveled around the world. She went on vacation everywhere and brought a lot of ideas together, and then brought them back to the West and started theosophy as a system to try to merge everything together. Theosophy has a very strong, like, Vedic influence on it, and a lot of people bring that up. But it is a very specific Vedic influence, right? Hinduism, Buddhism, and all the sort of, like, Eastern esoteric traditions are not one tradition, and they're not even, like, one school within themselves, right? Within Hinduism, for instance, there are a bunch of different subtypes of Hinduism, subtypes of Indic mysticism. Even within, like, a singular idea, like, say, Tantrism or Shaktiism, something like that, there's still going to be distinctions, right? Because the Vedic tradition, the Eastern traditions, have existed for thousands and thousands of years. It's at least 4,000 years. So there's a lot going on there that's more than what came back. Because what came back is what these occultists brought back with them, right? So it is not all of it. And basically, Blavatsky took that and she kind of, like, reinvented it. What Blavatsky taught is not the same thing as what you would learn in India if you were to study Hinduism in a specific, like, sect in a traditional way, right? It is her own thing. And she merged it with Western esoteric principles. Now, her influence of Western esotericism is kind of different than what was going on at the same time. Because at this time was the Victorian period, and this was during the age what we call the occult revival. Kenneth Grant wrote an entire book kind of about this subject and all the ideas that came out of it. But basically, there were a lot of people all around Europe getting really, really interested in esotericism. And these movements were not all singular, right? They are distinct. There was the occult lodges. This is where we get things like Thelema, the Golden Dawn, all that stuff was happening. At the same time, there was the spiritualism movement, which was the rise of seances and communing with the dead. And then there was theosophy. I like to distinguish these three because while they were happening at the same time, they held different beliefs and they actually kind of infought amongst each other. And fundamentally, they were not all the same, right? And a lot of these groups, even these separate groups, were trying to accomplish the same goal, right? If we look at the Western esoteric stuff going on in England with the Victorian occult revival, which groups like the Golden Dawn, the OTO, the Rosicrucians, all that stuff, they also had a similar mission, right? Their mission was the method of science, the aim of religion, which is once again trying to look at all these different traditions and discern the truth from them, but it was done in a different way. And so theosophy ends up having distinct beliefs that are theosophic, right? Blavatsky wrote extensively about reincarnation, the different civilizations, and that type of stuff. There's a lot that she wrote about that are distinct to theosophy. An interest amongst the Western occult revival was the idea of aeons, a revival of Hermeticism, which the classical Hermeticism was a huge influence on that group, whereas Blavatsky didn't really pull from that. As well, Gnosticism and Rosicrucianism and this renewed interest in the lineage of the Knights Templar really characterized the lodge occultism that was happening, whereas Blavatsky wasn't as interested in that. Also, the lodge occultism was very rooted in the West, right? It was very much interested in these traditions with some influence of like Middle Eastern esotericism, specifically like how the Knights Templar and the Order of the Assassins and Ismaili Shia order interacted. So there was some Islamic influence on this stuff, but fundamentally it was a lot more Western. Yes, there are things like the Tao Te Ching, the I Ching that do influence these people, but it's not as strong as Theosophy did. And I don't really think Theosophy does it the best. I think there are other writers who have brought the East and the West together stronger than Blavatsky did, who, if they had influenced the broader collective of the West, that would have been a lot better, right? Rene Guénon is my favorite East meets West thinker. He is a perennialist himself. He was heavily influenced by, you know, what he grew around. He was actually raised Catholic, and then he was to later leave Catholicism and get very invested in Sufism, though he also did write a bit about Hinduism and a bunch of stuff like that. And I think he did a much better job. In fact, he had a disdain for Theosophy because of the way it merged the systems together, because Guénon's influence and desire in combining the Eastern and Western systems together was that he believed there was a perennial truth, and the ultimate goal is not to just discern, you know, the highest form of religion is truth, but to find what this inner tradition is. Because what Blavatsky was trying to do was decipher what the truth is by things together, whereas Guénon believed that there was already a truth. We did not need to find the truth. We do not need to bring these things together to create the truth, but the truth already existed. And by finding the most static and unchanging mystical system, we can find that. Because he believed that truth does not evolve. Guénon was kind of against time, against progression. He believed that the goal was to find the mystic tradition that is the most of the same. He eventually decided that this would be Sufism, but I don't know if that is really necessarily the answer to that question, but that was his goal. I find his work a lot more compelling. And so what you get is there were a lot of these people trying to discover truth all at the same time, but they were doing it in different ways and writing about different things. And what would come out of them from their successors would be really different. And so Blavatsky's, her beliefs were very widespread, and they would, like lead to what there is now. Whereas if you look at like the Western occult lodge system, that did evolve as well. Systems like a Wicca were to later emerge from that. And, other things like there was stuff to emerge from that too, but what came out of it was different, right? From Gwenon, no one's really changing Gwenon, right? The people who are, big fans of Gwenon are kind of, still seeking for that same question and believers in this static truth thing. Now that we know where these came from, I want to just explain why you as a spiritual seeker who is interested in mysticism should avoid the New Age movement. Now, I'm not going to condemn everything in New Age books. I think that's ridiculous because I think a lot of these books, they are still from people trying to discern truth, and a number of them have takes that are, correct, right? I made an entire video about the Kabbalion, which granted is not New Age, but New Thought, the precursor to the New Age, and I went down the Hermetic principles, and I agreed with most of them, but my problem was they are not fully fleshed out, because what happened after these thinkers is that the New Age movement became really popular. The 1970s, the hippie era was massive. Even some good occult practices would merge into it, like the middle pillar exercise, which is an exercise that kind of lodge period occultism was really into, would get popularized during this period. And I love the middle pillar. I've taught people the middle pillar. I think the middle pillar is a great ritual. But when something gets popular, it gets diluted. And this is kind of one of the big questions about mysticism in general, and a question that has been debated amongst schools and traditions for, centuries, thousands of years, really, and that is, can everyone be a mystic? I hold the position that anyone, can if they are to seek it out, but maybe not everyone should. Maybe that is not within everyone's will. And there are some people who do not know how to handle mystic experiences, and it is very challenging for them. It can be even psychologically devastating because these are intense experiences. And of course, like all these great ideas and big ideas being popularized, they're gonna get simplified. That's just the nature of it, right? When you take something that's really complicated and hard to explain, like I've been trying to explain metaphysics to people for the past almost 4 years, and sometimes I still struggle because a lot of these things are very hard to put into words, or when you put them into words, they're very simple, but the wholeness of the concept cannot be grasped until you experience it yourself. So it is hard, and a lot of people will water things down. As well, new groups are going to emerge, and some groups are going to be good and some groups are going to be bad. And of course, there are some people who will, distort metaphysical teachings to their students for their own gain or for some other nefarious purpose. There are bad people who teach spirituality, who make things complicated. And what happened was the New Age was inundated with, let's be real about it, cults. Like there are New Age cults that really harm people. And what sucks about this is someone will be a New Ager and they'll have a really bad experience with it for a number of reasons. Or let's say they'll be taught like bits of Hinduism, but it'll be so oversimplified that they just think it's dumb. And then they'll leave this stuff and they'll have that as their impression for the entirety of esotericism, and it will harm everyone, right? Like I see Christians going on Twitter and they're like, oh, the New Age is terrible, and that's why Buddhism, that's why Hinduism, that's why Hermeticism, that's why Gnosticism are bad. And I'm like, you did not experience the fullness of that. Because a lot of these traditions you could study for lifetimes and lifetimes and still not grasp all of it. I don't believe a living person can understand the fullness of divinity. I'm learning, you're learning. I don't think anyone knows everything, right? And, the New Age can give people this false sense that they do know everything. There's this term, the Dunning-Kruger effect in psychology, right? Where basically when you have a little bit of knowledge, you think you're the expert of something. And then you realize, you learn a little bit more, and you realize you know absolutely nothing. And you feel this really intense sense of imposter syndrome. I think a lot of people in New Age, they'll be explaining these concepts in such a watered down way that they really will think they know everything, when in reality, they're only at the beginning of the mountain of their journey. And so it creates this arrogance. And it creates a false sense of, knowledge and understanding. because a lot of these traditions, it takes a long time to understand them, and some things only unfold when you interact with the mysteries themselves. As well, the New Age movement, I think it doesn't emphasize practice in a way that I think needs to be emphasized. A lot of the New Age movement kind of just argues that you can buy enlightenment, right? Like you can buy a crystal that'll bring you love and you just like sleep with the crystal and that's it. Whereas if you look at a mystic tradition that has been around for a long time, you will see that there are actually really complicated rituals and practices that go into developing this. I would say the one good thing the New Age movement has done is it has normalized meditation and mindfulness, even to the point where psychology has started studying it and discovering that it has immense help for people, which I think is really valuable. I think that meditation, contemplation, all these things are critical to growth. But once again, like a crystal is not going to do everything. Crystals, of course, did exist in older metaphysical systems. Cornelius Agrippa, the author of the 3 books of occult philosophy, one of the most iconic texts of Western occultism, and I like to call it the lawnmower manual of occultism because it's boring, but it has so much information in it, actually used crystal correspondences. And King Solomon, that guy, crystals, was involved in the traditions that would later emerge off of the Solomonic tradition in both the Western Goetia stuff and in the Eastern Jinn stuff that would emerge off of that. So, I mean, it's these things have use to them, but they're so oversimplified by the New Age. And also, I think a big problem with the New Age is the New Age doesn't really explain metaphysics or a why. For me, when I was new to esotericism, one thing that I really struggled with was, why am I doing this? Okay, sure, I meditate, but why? Okay, sure, I do this ritual, but why? And all these older systems, including some of these occult revival systems, explain a philosophy to them, a reasoning. Like if we look into the ancient world, you'll see Platonism as something that a lot of the Greek and Roman pagans and some Christians later on would relate back to, because Platonism gives a why, it gives a virtue, it gives a code, it gives all these explanations that like a lot of the New Age lacks. They just tell you things. They're like, oh yeah, do this. Or, oh yeah, reincarnation exists, but they don't explain what reincarnation means and how this actually impacts us as people. And so it lacks a lot of complexity. And as well, I think the metaphysics of the New Age are very simple. They'll say things like everything vibrates, which of course, vibration is an idea that emerges again and again and again perennially in a number of metaphysical systems. They don't explain why. Or they'll say vaguely, the universe connects us all, but they'll never explain that, oh yeah, a lot of systems believe that the universe emanates out from one source point, and then we are all emanations of this one thing that you can divide up into spheres and worlds and all these things. They just say, oh, it's all connected. And so you get this like, yeah, that's true, but that's not the whole truth, right? Or they'll say, connect to the divine feminine, which is a topic that I'm very passionate about, but they won't explain like what the divine feminine means in a metaphysical sense. What does form mean? What does being receptive mean? What do these ideas actually mean? And so it just makes the entire thing look silly. And people who are into mysticism, it makes them feel like, oh, these are just vague, terms and vague statements, but they're not anything more than that, which does a disservice to everyone. So if you're a metaphysical seeker, the New Age might have been where you start. Like, I know people who watch my channel have started in reading like things like, the Kabbalion, or I don't know, there's a bunch of these books. And then they're like, I want something more, because I wanted something more. I read a lot of these books early on and I wanted something more. So that's really all I have to say. The New Age movement and esotericism are not the same, though, there are parallels and there is some level of a connection, but it's not the same. And I think these things deserve to be distinguished. So thank you so much for watching. This video has a sponsor, so thank you so much to our lovely, lovely sponsor. So this video is brought to you in part by Assure Jewelry. It is a talismanic jewelry company that is actually operated by a practitioner just like us who make these beautiful pendants. This is an astrological pendant. You can see the zodiac wheel all around it, and this has actual emeralds in it. And they sell tons of pendant talismans, and I have a special code for you guys. You can get 15% off with code Georgina. So definitely do that, and you can get a number of these really beautiful, well-made, high-quality talismans. So definitely check them out. They're super cool, and they are not New Agers. They are serious practitioners, so that's cool too. And if you want to support me or get more of my videos, please like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you ring the bell and are subscribed for 93 days, you will be your holy guardian angel. I promise that's true, and definitely not a New Age lie. I'm kidding. It's Maybe I'm kidding. Maybe I'm not. You'll just have to see. So you got to subscribe to know. And you can find me on all sorts of platforms. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, Substack, Odyssey. And I host the podcast, The Postmodern Iconoclast, which is more of a cultural commentary podcast, but it does relate to themes of religion on this YouTube channel and on podcasting platforms. And if you want to support me and see more videos, please join my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, you get an extra video every single month, all of these videos early, access to my ritual guides, which are over 20 pages of rituals that I have written. They go from like most easy to most complicated, and they relate to the astrological themes of the month. And of course, you get access to the archives. So you get access to all my old ritual guides, which a number of them you can, use again and again and again. So it's super cool. Join my Patreon. It means a lot. And you can also donate directly through Venmo or through Ko-Fi if you don't want it to do that. And you just want to, give out of the kindness of your heart. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys in the next one. All right. Bye.